Hello, Emily. You just made a presentation on a leftist group during Maidan. My first question will be who are the leftists? Are they all radicals? And who are the non communist leftists? And what kind of groups we are talking about?
Sure. That's a very complicated question, of course, because left is a huge spectrum. So I know people who are leftists who identify as anarchists, who are probably the most radical. I also know some who consider themselves socialists. I know some who consider themselves communists in the very orthodox Marxist sense, not in the Communist Party sort of sense. And then you have your social democrats and people who sort of feel that party structures, leftist party structures, could be representative. So you end up with this pretty big structure of people who are quite radical and who are supportive of direct action, the tactic of occupation, who aren't necessarily scared of violence. And then you have this other slightly more moderate section of people who support legislative reforms, who support structural reforms in the government and that sort of thing. So you really have a pretty big divide of people who have different kind of tactics that structure the way that they feel about being left. So I use the term left as an umbrella term to talk about all of these people who do tend to work together, but who don't necessarily agree on tactics and exactly what it means to be a leftist.
Who are the groups who might fit more with Maidan protests ideologically?
I would think that it's the people who, well, actually that's a good question. I was going to say that it's the people who support legislative reforms, but at the same time it was the more radical people who adopted the similar sorts of tactics. So it really depends if you're asking about tactics or if you're asking about results at the end of the story.
Maybe, yeah.
Then I think it is both. And those students that I spoke about in the presentation were actually a mix of those people. So some of them were really influential in how that occupation of the ministry was organized, and those were leftist people. And then there are also leftist people who were really influential in getting Law 11872 on higher education passed. So they actually do kind of function in both ways in order to just dodge your question completely and say everybody, but yeah, it is actually everybody. Yeah.
You're talking a lot about this occupation of Ministry of Education. Why?
Personally, it was the most exciting thing that I thought happened in a sort of positive way, right? Obviously, massive violence is a really devastating thing, but that was actually a response to the violence. The students decided to occupy the ministry because they were trying to hold Tabachnik accountable for the violence. They were trying to call him out and say, if you condemn this, we'll step back. And he didn't show up. He was gone. And so they said, okay, we'll just wait inside the ministry until he comes back. And he never came back. And I just think that is the best response to what happened. And it was such a productive time for students to really stand their ground, say what they wanted to say, control things the way they wanted to control them. And they really had legislative success. I was just really surprised that people actually took them seriously because of how committed they were to that occupation. I thought it was the best thing that happened on Maidan.
More personal questions. You were in the U.S. during those protests, or where have you been?
No, I was in Ukraine. I started my fieldwork in September of 2013, so I had started doing some research with these leftist groups, and then in November Maidan started, so I went on November 22nd with a leftist anarchist friend of mine, and we were both sort of devastated that it was not going to be an open protest. We thought it was totally nationalist. They were not going to let anyone else talk. That person ended up being one of the people who organized the occupation of the ministry. So I basically stayed with this group of people, followed them around Maidan until July. And that's what my research is, basically, yeah.
How you do research when such things happen? You were a participant of it, or how you call yourself in such conditions?
It's an excellent question, because I was a participant. There's, photos with me floating around with the protest signs and everything. I had a lot of ethical kind of problems with this because I made a lot of decisions in the moment without really thinking about them. And then afterward, when I got home and I started looking at my field notes and sort of thinking, I was like, ooh, this is way more participation than anthropologists are usually supportive of. I don't think there was a right decision at the time. I just kind of did what I thought was going to be the right thing to do. I had a lot of really great network of people that I was doing research with who supported my research, who invited me to things that no other foreigners were going to be at so that I would know that they were happening, who never invited me to anything they thought was going to be really dangerous, so they kind of got me into the right circles of research without ever putting me in a position that I wouldn't be able to get out of, which was, I kind of just followed their lead, and that was how I let my research unfold, and I think it turned out pretty well.
Okay. Thank you much.
Thanks very much.